We are excited to welcome our guest, one of my favorite people on earth, Dev Basu, to the show. He's the founder and CEO of Powered by Search, where he spent 14 years scaling SaaS companies through organic and paid traffic acquisition. Besides being a literal encyclopedia about all things on how to grow and market your SaaS company, Dev also coaches agency leaders. He's writing a book. The first time I saw Dev speak, I felt like he might use a little more of his brain than most of the people I know when it comes to Google Ads. It was an incredible first experience. Dev, I'm so happy, man, to have you on the show. Thanks for coming.
I'm so stoked to be here.
I'm Johnny Page. I'm Matt Verleck. And this is the SaaS Academy Podcast.
Landed right from the plane, got to here. Excited to hang with you
It's
guys.
VIP treatment, man. Just right off the plane, right into a podcast, right?
There you go. Yeah.
I love it. Well, I was riffing with you and with Johnny right before we started. And it was funny, like I think back to, all my friends, and I have these different stories that pop out in my mind, and I wanted to use this as our jumping off point. And I still can't remember where we were when you told me this, but it was a story about you were selling video games out of your like high school locker. And the subtext behind this is, I always wonder about like the traits of entrepreneurs and leaders. Are they born? Are they made? There's a lot of discourse about that, but man, I don't know. I think it's a cool place to start. Like take us back, like talk about young Dev selling video games, man. Like how did that start?
Wow. You're taking me back to when I was like 13.
Okay.
That was like 3 lifetimes ago at this point. I'm 36.
We're going way back.
way back, right? So I think like necessity is the mother of all invention. And so, if you've ever felt like your back's up against the wall and there's something that you really want, but you just can't, you don't have the resources to make it happen, ingenuity kind of comes into play. And so my situation was I grew up in India for most of my life, and I had these friends who would come back from their summer vacations in the States or in Europe, and they would show off their shiny new PlayStation, some new game, FIFA or Lord of the Rings, and it would be the envy of the entire school. And the problem was that even if you had the cash, you couldn't actually go into a bookstore, which is where games were sold, surprisingly, and buy your 5 CD, whatever game you wanted, Grand Theft Auto or such. So what I wanted to do was actually legally download these games off the web. I had no concept of what was right or wrong at that age. And so I did, but then I realized that, oh boy, I need a CD burner. I actually need to buy one of these things to be able to get this game and play it on my PC. And so I didn't have the cash for that. And so what I did was I got fronted the cash. I bought a CD burner, not a DVD burner even at that point in time, CD-ROMs. And I shared it with a friend, and a friend said, hey, can you give me a copy of this? And by the way, are you getting any more games? And that's how it started. It was like, accidental customer development. And so I fell into it. And before I knew it, I had this like big, yellow sheet of paper. I was writing down people's names and their phone numbers and, whatever they wanted. And it was like an order list, a pre-order list, really.
Yeah, you're pre-ordering before it was cool, man.
Yeah, exactly. And so without knowing it, that was kind of my first business.
That's cool. And so you don't accidentally lead the fastest growing agency in Canada, right? So what's the path from there to here? You've had a massive amount of success. You're someone I look up to, at an extremely high level. Like, how do you go from video games to Powered by Search, in its 14th year?
Wow. I started out as a product marketer at Microsoft, and that was while I was doing school. I did a business degree full-time and worked full-time as well. And after that, I built up an agency for the Yellow Pages group, an affiliate of theirs. And then when school was done, I was like, okay, well, I'm working full-time and I was doing school full-time. With school being done, I had a bunch of time on my hands. And so the bet really was, let's try and launch something for 6 months. I was already speaking at conferences. I had a blog. I was doing my own affiliate marketing. These are just experiments kind of on the side. And so in 2009, on a whim, over a weekend, I just incorporated the business, built the website, and launched the thing. And I was like, give it 6 months. And if it fails, it fails. I can always go back and get a job, and kind of the rest becomes history essentially from over there. And we've gone through probably 3 evolutions since then. We started out purely in search, SEO and paid search, and then I merged with 2 other agencies in 2014, and that brought on some demand gen and also some web development and design capabilities as well in content marketing. I bought out those partners in 2018. And then since then went remote. And so that was really the unlock for us in being able to service, clients from Auckland to Atlanta, and then have team members kind of throughout the world. There are 9 different countries, 40 people.
Wow.
And so we use I was inspired by the movie Moneyball and Billy Bean's story of how he went.
Got to get on base, right?
Exactly, right? Like, being able to find amazing talent no matter where they were.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. We went out to basically, we were able to go in and find people that were amazing in Brazil and in Europe and in APAC. And no matter really where they were, they had a passion for SaaS. They knew what they were doing. And the one thing that was kind of in common that they had was everybody felt like a lone wolf. So they were doing amazing things, but alone. And they wanted to do it in sort of a community under a roof together to be able to learn from other people. Often we were interviewing people and they're saying, I'm kind of the smartest person in my company. I teach everybody what I know, but I'm not learning. And so I want to be in an environment where I'm learning. And so we brought a bunch of these people together and kind of built a crazy, lab. That's powered by Search today.
That's cool. It's interesting because you talk about, your team always wanting to learn and maybe not feeling challenged, and that's what helps attract them to you. We talk a lot, Johnny and I in particular, and on this podcast about the mindset of an entrepreneur. A lot of it's founder focused just based on our work at SaaS Academy. But like, how much overlap do you think there is? How many of the behaviors that make a good founder also make a great team member? Because I know that one is, that Venn diagram's a circle on that particular example. But what else do you see there?
Look, I think the only difference between a really high-performing team member and a high-performing entrepreneur is their appetite for risk. That's really what it is. I think entrepreneurs can withstand and are often drawn to huge amounts of volatility. You get that rush of, again, feeling like your back's up against the wall. You're not going to make payroll. Your largest customer just quit. You made a mistake of some kind. We see this with our friends and the peer group all the time, where there's these stories essentially of rising up. And I think that is deeply scary for a lot of people. And I think like entrepreneurs are actually the exception, not the norm, really.
Yeah.
And that's why we also know that as entrepreneurs, we can't go very far without having amazing people to surround us and to complement us basically as well. So I think, highly driven people in general they're curious, they're resourceful, and they just figure it out. They figure out a way essentially. Now, if you add a little bit of, a sprinkle of risk basically into the mix, that's where things start to change. How much risk do you want to take on? And even still, and even within entrepreneurship, you have people who love bootstrap life, being able to do things on your own terms. And then you have those people who want to swing for the fences and raise a lot of venture capital. And that comes with its own set of, demons as well, right?
It sure does.
And so I think there's just like levels basically to it.
Yeah. You always been a risk taker?
I think so. Risk doesn't scare me, I think, because I tend to be prepared when thinking about it, and just I think a lot about making educated bets and thinking about how things will play out in terms of second and third order consequences a lot.
Yeah.
Very much a systems thinker. And so it doesn't mean that there's always going to be reward, but there's a balance of risk and reward essentially.
Yeah. It's funny. I can tell a fellow systems thinker. We have those you might be listening online, a copy of the book, The Goal, sitting on the counter over here. And there was the first thing Dev looked out and he walked in and was like, oh, the goal, book ahead of its time. But I mean, it's the same kind of thing, right? Everything's a machine with second, third order effects, like you said, man.
I'm curious. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm curious. What's the most recent bet you took or risk?
We are starting to scale our own cold email. And I think the risk in it was we've got a great reputation in the industry, both from clients and also from team members as well. And there was a part of me I had this limiting belief that I don't want to be one of those cringy cold emails that somebody screenshots and puts up on Twitter and says, here you go.
It goes in the Hall of
that
Fame.
would just
Don't
make
do
my
this.
blood kind of curdle almost
Yeah.
and make me want to throw up. And I was like, there has to be a better way of doing this where it's still a channel that works. I'm not going to, poo-poo the channel essentially. I've seen a lot of marketers do that. And what I did was I placed myself in the seat of a salesperson instead who understands cold email that is, but does not understand marketing. And marketing seems just as foreign basically to them. So we're starting to scale up cold email right now and doing it in a very sort of well-researched kind of thesis-based approach, and it's working.
I love Matt and I talk about thinking in bets frequently.
Probably
it's
daily.
It's in our daily vernacular. how did you said, hey, I'm prepared. I'm willing to take risks, but I'm prepared. And I think about the first, second, third order effects.
Yeah.
Can you just like, whether it's cold email and that's the best example to use or another one, can you walk us through like how you essentially you're going through an exercise of de-risking or at least being aware of the cost before going in
Yeah.
and limiting the downside potential while maximizing upside.
Yeah.
Can you help us like just talk through how you calculated that bet?
So, I mean, we're doing this podcast kind of sitting down, but if I was standing up, I'd be drawing this out for you because I tend to be a very visual, models-driven type of person. But my brain tends to think a lot in terms of decision trees, essentially, right? Like you could go down path A or path B, and a lot of the thinking is if you go down path B, can you backtrack to back to the node essentially where you made the decision? And we've all been there. If you've ever been in the woods, for example, where you go down a certain path and it's just not viable to come back. That's the first place that I think about is the decision reversible or irreversible? And then there's lots of sort of thinking maxims basically associated with it. So like, Jeff Bezos has got a regret minimization framework, which is basically, will I regret this decision? If I will, I probably won't make it. But if it's reversible, then we could test it for some period of time to a certain level of depth and basically go from over there. And so that's sort of the first thing that I think about. And teach our team and our clients as well of thinking in this particular way, and it's well accepted. I think the 80-20 on it is just the second order effect. You don't even need to go to third and fourth to be able to be vastly at a different level than where most people basically think about these bets. Even just thinking not just what is the right next step, which is, I talk to people all the time. We talk about like focus or prioritization and how challenging that can be, how overwhelming work basically is. And so one of the common things to do that is, what's the right next thing? Just the next thing. Keep your eye on the ball, one step at a time. But it also helps sometimes to be able to zoom out and go like, where are we going? Like, where is this ultimately going to land up, right? And so that second order type of consequence is what will I'll whiteboard out typically, or use my iPad and draw it out and go, where is this going to land up? Let's think about this like a game of chess. When you go down 4 or 5 moves, there's only so many outcomes that can end up happening. And so let's backtrace and go, what would need to be true for that outcome if it's a negative outcome not to happen, or if it's a positive outcome to double down basically on it.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
That's cool. It reminds me of this TED talk I saw from Tim Ferriss. It was a while back, and it was more around this. I think is like the tactical outcomes of making a bet, and he was thinking more around the psychological outcomes of making a bet. But he called it fear setting, right?
Yes,
you seen it?
I actually did a fear setting exercise over the holidays, right? Because
this is why we're friends.
I think all of us had a very interesting year in 2023.
Yeah,
and I looked and I sat down. I basically said, what are all the things that I'm afraid will happen? Just recognizing, I think I've done a bunch of personal work in terms of not pushing away emotions, but being able to just accept them as they are and listen to them as well. So I actually did a fear setting exercise. I sat in a coffee shop and wrote down all the things that, I was afraid of and what I could do to repair them so that they wouldn't actually end up happening, what the right next step was from over there.
Yeah,
that's cool.
And that's the framework what Dev just walked through, right? So it's essentially in a given situation, writing down all of the different like worst case scenarios or deep seated fears that you have that might show up, and then like what's the worst thing that could happen if that fear comes true, and what can I do to offset the negative impact of that thing happening. And at least when I've done it, what I've found, I'm curious, this was your experience, is it's like there's so many fears that bring up like big feelings, right? Like big gnarly emotions, and then when you take the logical approach to actually just writing down, well, actually if I just like, I don't know, hire this person or outsource this thing or make this arrangement, you're like, I can't even figure out what I was so afraid of. It's like so many of them, it's like, and some of them are still big and some of them are still scary, sure. But at least for me, maybe I get fearful over silly stuff and I talk myself out of it. I don't know. But like a lot of the time there's a logical through line to at least reducing the impact. We just have to think about it,
I've never done that. It seems like it'd be very helpful.
Yeah, I'll put the video in the show notes. It's a good one.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. Sweet. And so powered by search historically, so let me back up so I have context our listeners might not have. So 100% B2B SaaS focused.
100%. Yeah.
Love it. Be good at one thing, be the expert, stay narrow, rock and roll. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what size, like what's your kind of trajectory been over the past, decade or so? I think moving up market has been up until recently. Yeah. Or
yeah. So we've historically had this march up market from startup to enterprise. We've got clients that are public tech companies, Cloud 100, Forbes, Cloud 100 list companies, series sort of C, D, and B essentially. So every year what we did over the last probably 6 years is our kind of role was next year is going to be, we're going to graduate a tier essentially. So we're going to graduate from bootstrap to seed, from seed to A, and so on all the way up, which was fascinating for us to go through because it's like progressive load and weightlifting, right? You become a whole different person by the time that you're lifting 300, for example, than you were at 180. It's just a completely different kind of experience. And so we were like, well, if you can lift 300, you can definitely lift 180. But if you can lift 180, does not mean you can lift 300. And so we went down that sort of complexity of, can we serve the sophisticated needs of a public tech company, for example, in a hard to understand niche like cybersecurity? We've got 18 different cybersecurity clients that we work with now, and a variety of very technical, niches. We work in DevOps and other security and compliance products as well. And then we have a whole smattering. Like I would say, a third of our clients are bootstrapped companies that are doing anywhere between like $1 million to 20 million in ARR, right? And some of them are really well known, like a Basecamp, for example. We work with those guys. The thing that we found was that when we went back to our kind of mission statement, it's to make B2B SaaS companies unstoppable. Because our core thesis is software companies will have forgotten more about building product than they know about marketing. And we have forgotten more about marketing than we know about building product. And the reality is almost every incoming client that we work with has a product that is better engineered than their marketing is. And so we give away the farm. Like most of the stuff that we know, we teach it, we give it away for free, whether it's on our blog or on templates or whatever we basically do. Even within SaaS Academy, for example, I think I've shared stuff that we train and teach on since 2017, 2016.
Yeah, I ran my first Facebook ad because
just
Dev
gonna
Basu
say,
showed me the Facebook ad builder.
You're sitting with two disciples right here, man.
100%.
That's right. You guys have both kind of done it yourselves in your own companies before becoming part of
We
this.
did 48 hours after I joined SaaS Academy as a client. I went to Toronto to that intensive where we first met, and you did the Google AdWords builder training, and that was what my little quip in the intro was about. I was like marveling at just the depth of what you rolled out, and I mean, like, can verify you held nothing back, man. It was the whole playbook. Yeah, it was really impressive.
So we kind of give away the farm for free.
Yeah.
And then what we realize is that enterprise companies don't want to learn as much as they just want to buy the outcome.
Yeah.
And so we went kind of marched, up market to that. And then we were going, what do we want to do? It's not just about a financial outcome. We run a nice 8-figure business. It's remote, distributed, 40 team members all throughout the world. It's a really great business to have.
Yeah.
But could we be helping more people? Because, if we want to help more people have more fun while doing it, we had to go back down market and think about, even though we give away all this information for free to startups, what we realize is they come back to us often and they say, I'm still getting stuck. I don't know. Like, I know it, but I don't know how to do it. And I need help doing it. And so we challenge ourselves essentially to go back at the end of this year in 2023 and go, what would it look like if we were able to do what we do for much larger companies, but to do that at the startup level and give them essentially a CMO in a box, right? So the right combination of strategy, roadmaps, as well as execution, and do it omni-channel. So not just search, not just social, not just marketing ops and rev ops, but the whole thing together. And could we do it in a way where it would be from click to closed won customer, for example, for companies that we're selling via demo? Or could it be from click to paying, from trial to paid user, essentially, if there was a self-service motion? And so we said, like, let's kind of boil this down to just the basics, just the good stuff and nothing else, right? Like our Aussie friends would say, all killer, no filler.
Yes.
Right? And so we did that, and it's been going really well. And so now we're able to offer that to startups at a very startup-friendly type of price point. Starts at like $5,000 per month. There's no long-term contracts, and we're basically hanging our hat on just results, and that's why we'll stay. It's been working really well.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
That's
Do you
awesome.
find that was it's interesting because you made this large decade-long march up market, getting into the most complex industries, the most complex stages of business, and then making a massive pivot to down market of where you started. Like, how did you approach that as a leader and getting the team bought in? Like, I feel like that probably felt, and I'm sure you navigated it beautifully, but I could imagine it would feel jarring strategically to some of the team. Like, how'd you work through that?
Well, so it actually came from the team is why we made
Love it.
the
That's
pivot.
cool.
It wasn't my idea. I was actually quite resistant to the idea of going down market because, what would it do to our positioning? What I realized is this: our larger customers don't care if we also work with startups. Startups do care aspirationally that we work with large brands, but it also comes at the side effect of them going, I literally get DMs basically saying, I would love to work with you someday. And that part is what breaks my heart about, like, why someday? Like, why not now? Because I have,
I sent you a DM like that in 2019. I can probably go find it. Like, I remember talking about it. We were talking about the revenue, and I was like, oh, I'm just not there yet, but I'd love to work with you.
Yeah, which is like a very common sort of feeling, right?
Yeah.
Like when you want something and you're kind of like, I need to grow into it. And I never wanted us to be like a status symbol or anything like that, but I just want to be of service, basically. And so the team was going, hey, I've got a friend who basically has a software company. Could we do a couple of consulting calls with them? We're like, yes, we could. Let's help them out. But, what we could do for them in an hour is only so much. And what we could do for them over the course of a year is a lot. And so we challenged ourselves because of the team really coming back and asking those questions. And we wanted to actually reduce the barrier to success, not to working with us particularly, but these customers end up growing because usually what I find is it's not just a financial gap. It's a trust barrier. It's just like they've never had marketing work well for them before. They've somehow figured out product. And it's a little bit like, when you become a parent, I have a 2.5-year-old now, and I can't really remember what it was like through the first 6 months of life. I've completely forgotten about that. Yeah. And if we were to go out and do it again, I'm sure it would be easy, or easier, I suppose, because of that kind of lived experience. But I think until you know what good looks like, it feels really scary at the end of the day.
It's funny, when we just had Marcel on the podcast, we were talking a lot about how SaaS companies interact with agencies. And, what you said, I think, is super true about they might not know what good marketing looks like. They also might not know what a good agency relationship looks like. So there's trust in every facet of that whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's interesting. So in your work with all of these people, man, like the breadth of founders you've talked to is very, very wide. One of the things that Johnny and I focus on a lot, we focus on it a lot with our boardroom clients and with our SaaS Academy clients too, is around the proper structuring of incentives, for leaders, for executives in particular. Mm-hmm. And, it's funny because I feel like, especially in larger enterprises, there's always the tension of demonstrating a return on investment especially for marketing agencies, and certain channels, or you can attribute a little bit easier, certain channels you can't. The tension between sales and marketing always gets really fascinating sometimes. Right. So I don't know, like, if you were to, let's say you were coaching me as a newer founder on how to make marketing and sales incentive plans work well together for the greater good. Like, I'm sure you've seen the world class, I'm sure you've seen the not so world class. Like, I don't know, let's riff on that for a minute, man.
So I think process design plays a big role in this. And I think companies who just go, I'm going to hire a VP of sales, I'm going to hire a VP of marketing and let them figure it out, are going to be in for a world of pain. Because these two people are coming from different walks of life. Maybe they've worked well with, the other party or that department well together, but chances are they haven't. I mean, what I've seen over the last 15 years is marketing blames sales for an inability to close, and sales usually blames marketing for quality of lead, and they're measured differently. There's a handoff process. When I say I kind of go back to process design, if you're a founder, what you want is growth. Yeah. And there's a process to doing that, from getting people to know you, to like you, to trust you enough. Once they trust you enough, you still haven't earned their business. That's where the sales part basically comes in, and you have to then go do problem discovery and then stretching the gap and understanding sort of how the platform uniquely can help them compared to the alternatives that they have in the market. And then there's price is really a function of the value that they think that they're getting at the end of the day. So it's a team sport. Yeah. And if you have the team sport essentially played on two different fields, you're not playing the same game. Yeah. And so the idea really is, can you bring everybody onto the same game and measure them the same way as well? And so, in sports, you have this idea of starters and finishers and assists kind of along the way, no matter what game you're kind of looking at. I think the companies that do this well typically have one dashboard which lets them see leading and lagging indicators. And whether you're looking at the leading indicators of, on the sales side, it might be an SDR or a BDR team, for example, doing cold outreach. On the marketing side, it could be MQL generation in terms of events or gated content, for example. Well, that's one bucket of intent. They're the right people, hopefully, as in the target audience is your ideal customer profile. But the way that they're getting into your world as a software founder is different, fundamentally. But they're coming in at the same stage of awareness, which is, didn't know you, now I know you. Doesn't mean I like you, doesn't mean I trust you. And so if you're thinking about incentives, just the key KPIs, I think, are talked about a lot, key performance indicators. We tend to think a lot about key performance actions instead, KPAs. And the thing with KPAs is you don't get kind of obscured into jargon land with all these acronyms. You just go, okay, so this is a person on our list of ideal customers, essentially. They're from a target company or from based off their demo or their firmographics, they're the right person. What do we need to show them so that they start getting interested in the problem that we're solving? And that becomes a unique way of, the gates through which they come in might be different, but the destination becomes the same, which is they need to, when a company says we need to build awareness, it's always awareness of something. And it usually, the mistake that we see at least is it's not awareness of the company. It's not just saying, hey, we exist. That's not enough. What you want awareness of is shedding a light on a problem unaware prospect and simply making them aware that there is a problem that exists. Right? They might be symptom aware. It's like, when you have a wobbly tooth, but you're like, I'll take care of it later, until it becomes a root canal.
Right.
Part of the process in marketing and sales is just, are you doing it one-to-one in sales? Or are you doing it one-to-many in marketing? And getting everybody on the same page that what we're trying to do is illuminate a light on this problem that's basically happening. And that's the first step. And the second step after is, okay, now that they know you and that you solved this problem, do they like you? People buy for different reasons. McKinsey actually has a 7S framework of all the reasons why people buy, ranging from systems to style to, the staff, for example. In services businesses, often our clients will say, well, we know we're not going to work with you necessarily, Dev. We want to meet the team. That doesn't necessarily happen in software because people kind of go, they don't necessarily buy based off the strength of the CS team, right? And so you kind of need to understand your buyer's buying motion essentially as well as in terms of what they care about. And then I think the key is now that you know what the key performance actions are, even though they may be different for sales versus marketing, bringing them all under one roof. And then you're the master of this in terms of scorecards and putting together a rhythm and a cadence essentially so that they talk. That's an important thing. The best organizations we see have a feedback loop. And so a one-way, not a loop, a one-way sort of, arrow into a pit of despair and darkness would be something like sales just goes, we're not going to hit our target. Marketing, generate more leads. And then the marketing leader pushes down pressure down their organization, which eventually cascades down to individual contributors who don't hear the why. All they hear is we need more leads.
More MQLs.
More MQLs, more SQLs. Let's do it at a lower cost of acquisition. They have no idea why this is happening. And it's primarily because from a systems design or process design perspective, there isn't a closing the loop meeting where sales says, hey, we had 10 amazing conversations this week. 8 of them were from our ICP, 2 were not from our ICP. Let me tell you about, hey, marketing, let me tell you about what we liked and what we didn't like. How many of the talk tracks were the same talk tracks we expect? And that never happens. Almost never happens. But the best companies put in a structure so that teams are discussing that, and it's a closed loop where the feedback loop is positive and it keeps getting better and better over time.
So Dev, I'm pretty deep into some research, and we're going to publish a resource to teach founders how to create those compensation plans for that first layer of leadership. And one of the areas I've been focused on is making sure that there is a variable compensation plan for everyone on the revenue team that aligns with like when the company wins, those leaders win. And I've been looking to make sure there's an intersection between the two. One of the first versions that we had deployed had there to be a scenario where marketing was driving top line, top funnel action, they're hitting all their KPIs, but then it's not following through to sales. And then we get into the age-old conversation. And I moved the incentive for marketing to just be based on revenue production, and a lot of problems went away. So I'm curious, down to the comp plan, I think a lot of what you just shared was making sure that there's organizational alignment and conversation around, hey, it's us on the same side of the table versus the problem. But have you seen like the mechanics around the compensation plans have an impact? And if so, I'm curious. That was one way. I'm sure that there's some ways that there's some downside to it as well of just, the market. You have to have a pretty open-minded marketing person. If I put that on the job description, they're gonna have a whole lot of questions about who the director of sales is and how it's working. And so we're there's some experiments in progress there. But I'm curious what you've seen to help just down to an individual compensation plan perspective, make sure that there's that alignment.
So what we see a lot of is asks from our clients to look at CMO and VP marketing compensation plans, sometimes head of growth compensation plans and job descriptions. And the way it starts out is a client reaches out and says, hey, I'm thinking of working with a head of marketing to work with you guys directly. Amongst other things, there's things that they would do that we don't do. Like, for example, we don't do any affiliate marketing or events or offline oriented work. And, what do you think of this job description? And often it doesn't include a comp range in it, which we advise you should put in if you're trying to get the best talent, which freaks people out a little bit for some reason. But
it's fascinating, right?
It really is. That's a wild one to unpack. It's like the best possible thing you could do is make sure that they knew what they were getting themselves into
100%
from the very beginning. Like, describe all the good and the bad about it. Like, the right person will run to the role, and you want everyone else to run away. Yeah, so
it's like an outdated. Oh man, it's like it's this whole outdated mindset. It's like stepping over $10 to pick up a nickel, though, right? Because it's like, I don't want to show my hand, then I might be able to, like, if you're negotiating over $5,000 for a leadership role, you've already lost. Like, pay the person what they're worth, have an incredibly high standard, and if they can't do it, then make the change, right?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, the best people do 150 to 200% of what their role is in the JD, essentially, right? And then they keep growing and growing and taking on more responsibility and more compensation in their companies. But to answer your question, we kind of think about it this way. What are the inputs that lead to the outputs that lead to the outcomes? And so if you know what the outcomes are, but you're fuzzy, that kind of, was it a cartoon that said step 1, something, step 2, then step 3, profit?
Yeah,
right?
Like a little meme or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't know what step 1 and 2 are, it's fuzzy. One of the things that I'm a firm believer in is that if you can't describe what you do as a process, you don't know what you're doing. This is from Edward Deming, the guy who came up with Toyota's manufacturing process back in the 60s, and actually was an influence on Goldratt writing the book as well. And so in this inputs leads to outcomes. If you know what your outcome is, like that you're here and you want to go up in ARR, for example, you might say that I want to do that by net customer acquisition from either sales or marketing. It's going to be some pie chart mix basically between, let's just say it's 50% marketing driven, 50% sales driven, for example. You already know what your outcome metrics are, but you might not be really clear on the output metrics. It's not just MQLs and SQLs. This is the part where people stop getting excited about it because it's the hard work. You got to get into the trenches. You really do need to define what are the precursors to revenue. So for example, you likely aren't going to win any customers in a sales-led process without doing a demo. It seems kind of a given. It's a dev, of course. But what are all the steps that need to happen from a demo to close? If we're talking on the sales side, we don't do sales consulting, but we sell enough ourselves, millions of dollars every year to know what a good sales process looks like and look at a lot of sales tape from our clients. We listen into their gong calls or chorus or Clary or whatever. And so what we find is that the best reps usually have they've got discovery. They map to bigger problems, not just surface level problems. They do mutual action plans and work back plans, for example. They thread through and go through not just one person, but the entire committee, that's buying committee. And they speak differently to each person in terms of what their motivations basically are. Yeah. Well, that's a process, right? What's the process, right? And so those are all outputs. So if you're hiring a VP of sales and you don't know that mutual action plans, which get the buyer and the seller on the same side of the table, are a thing, you would probably want to know what those outputs are. They would need to come in and create that, much in the same way that, like Matt, you came in and really institutionalized the precision scorecard at SaaS Academy, right? Before that, maybe scorecards would approach at a certain level and you just took it to a completely different level. And so they should get comped a certain percentage on the artifacts, which are these outputs existing, without which the outcomes would be kind of, you would have large amounts of variance.
Yeah.
And then you would have inputs from over there. I think the mistake that sometimes people make in a job description is they purely say that it's a percentage of the outcome, but you also need to show people how they're going to get
100%.
there as well.
Yeah, 100%. You have to have the align on, and we co-create what do we believe the path is to that outcome, and then say, used earlier with there's the leading indicators and the lagging indicators, the objectives, or I think you're referencing the inputs and the outputs, that hey, if we did these things and this was like criteria that we achieved them at, we can all assume with reasonable expectation that the outcome's going to be there, and to balance the two. Huge unlock.
I had a question for you on this, Dev, and it's based off of a lesson that I've learned relatively recently in my career. Like I used to be one of these guys that was like, oh, comp's like kind of important, but I don't know how much. You get the right person, they'll do the right thing, and then I had a lot of lucky hires early in my career that really reinforced that belief. And I don't have a bad story about how I learned this. It's just been like additive success, where we started to put more effort into compensation and more effort into aligning incentives, and just getting like blown away by the exponential return on that work as leaders, and seeing the motivational impact it has on the team. Like, at what stage of business have you learned a similar lesson? Like, was there a point early on where I was trying to figure it out, but like what was that aha moment for you, where like, oh, like I knew this kind of mattered, but now I know it really matters?
Well, so when it came to comp, so I grew up in an immigrant family. We were taught that debt's a bad thing. You only spend what you have. I don't have any debt of any kind in life, into the business whatsoever. And so we can only afford whatever we can afford. Now I say that as a plus, but it's actually a con as well, because when it came to something like comp, early on in the business was like, can I really afford that? Like, wow, And every time we actually kind of suspended our disbelief and said, maybe we can, let's try it. More often than not, it's been a pleasant surprise, in terms of like, wow, this is what the good looks like at this compensation level, essentially. And then adding in variable components that are much more tied to those outcomes and outputs rather than inputs made a world of difference, because then that gave, the best players, they're managing their time, their energy more than their time, frankly, right? So, and they have different family commitments and whatnot. So if you just, in the beginning, we said, we need somebody 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And now it's, I don't care, as long as you get the outcomes basically done.
Yeah.
You do it on your schedule and your time. And we're just on the same page. We're going to co-create what that outcome looks like and a measurement cadence for the outputs. What you do in terms of inputs, doesn't matter, right? We put in some policies, like for example, as LLMs and ChatGPT basically came out, we said, look, our stance on it is we're not going to ever produce anything that you just hit a button and it's the AI output. That's just, it would be a fireable offense basically for us. But if you want to use that to aid your workflows and you're the human who's signing off on what actually goes out the door, go ahead and do that. Yeah, that's completely fine, because we're not measuring on and comping on time in this case, right? So that's one way of being able to look at it. So we have more visibility into the marketing side of comp than on sales, but it's a conversation that happens often.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's I found similar results just to confirm in our world, where it's I think there's two things that come to mind. The first is exactly what you said around that point where you hire someone, or maybe the comp scares you, or it's something you haven't yet done before. But if the talent's commensurate with a comp plan, or doing a good job hiring, it usually works out. Yeah. The second is like the freedom that a well-designed compensation plan gives you, because you can look at someone in the face and truly mean this when you say, I want you to make more than your OTE. I want you to exceed what we're projecting. I want to pay you all the money. I want to pay you everything. And you know that your comp plan is built in a way where your business is winning if they achieve that outcome. And then you can truly like root for your team to succeed and make more money than they thought was possible. And like, that's a fun place to be. Yeah. It's super cool. Yeah. Well, I'd love to talk about team a little bit more. So you had mentioned early on, you guys pivoted, you're a distributed team. And you talked a lot about distribution around the world, right? And so you've got clients in multiple countries, multiple locales. You've got team members in multiple locales. A lot of people, I think, they look at distributed teams primarily as a cost saving mechanism.
Right.
I'm curious, especially with the fact that I think world class marketing, especially enterprise marketing, there's a localization component to like,
Right.
how have you structured that? Do you have teams in the same locales that service the clients? What's your structure? Are they built in pods with different seniority levels? Like, how do you approach it?
So we are built in pods, and there is a structure to it that's very similar to a management consulting company. So you start out in an associate role and move to consultant and move further up from over there, basically moving from individual contributor up to 7 levels of sort of competency that we have within there. And then we don't force people to become managers, which is something a lot of other companies do. The last thing that sometimes I think about it as a founder is if you have somebody who's amazing at what they do, and they have no desire to manage people, why would you make them less amazing and less, capable and have as much time really to work with clients, when you could just say like, okay, you don't want to do this. My VP of strategy, Mike, who's been with me for 12 years, doesn't want to manage people. And so I never told him that he needs to.
Yeah.
And so we just said like, that's a kind of a contrarian way of thinking in the company.
Because you have ascension paths, like seniority paths on both tracks, like
Exactly.
manager and
Yeah.
non-manager.
And so there's been like
Oh, cool.
ICs who get paid more than their manager. And we hire people who are mercenaries who would not get upset by that. Like we've had people who've been like, as a manager, I can't stand being paid less than an individual contributor that reports into me. I'm like, then that's not how we do things here. That's not part of our culture.
Yeah.
And so we can coach you, in or out or up or out, basically. With that in mind, essentially. To your point about distributed teams, what we primarily look for is there has to be some comfort and overlap around hours of operation. So for example, I'm in Eastern, but our client in Auckland, can only meet when it's their 7 a.m. and our 5 p.m. So it's no bueno for, our East Coast teams, basically. But it works for our European teams. It works for our APAC teams. We don't do it primarily to be able to service clients, but it's sort of like go find the best people no matter where they're at. Establish a rhythm of when they're able to work and what their lifestyle basically should look like. We had an SEO director who worked with us for a number of years, and he lives in Dubai and has a young family. So he said, you know what, I would love to be able to spend the entire day with my family, my local time, and then I actually want to work from 8 p.m. my time until 2 or 3 a.m. And we're like, are you sure about that? And he was like, yeah, this is exactly what I want. Okay, great. So he catches up on sleep and during the day and will be with his family, and that's a fantastic life for him. So people can like design their life that way.
That's cool.
So we don't map it to clients necessarily, but we want to make sure that if you are a client in a certain kind of region of the world, that you don't have to, it's not inconvenient for you to work with people stateside. What I have found is interesting is if you are a European or an APAC or an Australian SaaS company, they kind of default go like, if we want the best talent, we have to work with a North American company. And so they tend to be open to North American hours.
Yeah.
And we kind of go like, well, why is that? Like, does that have to be the case? Because there's, again, amazing people like Zoho, for example, is in India, huge company.
Huge.
Atlassian's and based out of Australia, huge company, now with obviously global coverage and whatnot. But there are amazing people no matter where they are on the planet. Yeah. And as a small kind of independently owned company ourselves, we just go, we're just going to find them. Yeah. And it's not even a very super, I wouldn't say it's a super strategic program where we go in and say, okay, we want to hire in Brazil. Let's find a recruiter over there. It's just putting out good content with proof points of really screenshotting our NPS results, screenshotting
You do that a lot. You do that really well. I've seen on the employee NPS results
yes,
too.
Exactly.
The right stuff I've seen. Yeah.
Like one of our guys went on bereavement leave because his grandfather died last week, unfortunately. And he came back and just left the most kind note that everybody checked in on him, and also made sure that he didn't have a pile of work to return to. Like it was a clean slate by the time he got back. And he was just like, I couldn't have expected, more. And you guys still ended up over delivering. So that just goes into a little like a wins folder. It's a helpful thing, even if no one else ever sees it. It helps me on dark days to go back and go, look, we're doing some good. We're helping people.
Yeah. Oh, so just in case you did that really fast, and I think it's really important, so I want to step on it for a second. Like, so you're saying you have a personal wins folder for things that for you as an individual make you feel great, business or whatever. It's just a place where you can file it and then revisit it when
100%. Yeah. As cool. I've gotten older, I've realized there are different things that give me joy, and it's not always money.
Yeah.
It is helping people at the end of the day and seeing some sort of transformation and change or a perspective shift basically in them, where they are now capable of something that they weren't capable of before. It's the same kind of thing, like, as parents, like you see your kid doing something that they weren't able to do before, and they go, I did it.
Yep.
And it's an amazing feeling.
Yeah.
It is.
Dev, I feel like it would be a missed opportunity for us to have you on and to not talk through some of the levers that when you go in, you go into a SaaS company somewhere between, $1 million and $5 million.
Yep.
There's probably some low hanging fruit, some pockets that whether they're doing organic or they're managing paid, there's probably some pockets where you're like, hey, we know we can go get some quick wins. You're like, what are the ones you find most frequently when you're managing in-house or you're just not paying the attention there? What levers can they pull?
So let's just talk about, like, regardless of who does the work, a couple of things we see missed in that bracket, and often beyond that bracket as well. So the first one I'll mention is they're chasing after traffic when they should be chasing after conversions, which are trials and demos instead. How do you do that? If you're a sales-led company, then just think about the top 10 questions that seem to keep popping up from prospects and ask yourself, do I have a blog post about this? And if the answer is no, write a blog post about the exact way your top rep answers that question and drop in screenshots of your product as well as screenshots of prospects, including if you have the ability to get their permission and they became customers. Take a little snippet of the demo where they had the aha moment.
Smart.
And put that in a blog post. It does two things. The next time you have a prospect, you can email them that blog post as a after call kind of recap and say, hey, I noticed you had some questions about how we do blah, blah, blah. We've actually written about this. You can read this blog post over here, including 3 customers who use it exactly the way that you had, shared your use case. So even before it gets any lead acquisition traffic, it'll be a lead converter because it becomes a case study within a teaching framework, essentially. So top 10 problems, blog about them. No one almost does this before we start talking about it.
So start looking at, instead of looking at traffic, look at your conversions. Extract top 10 questions from the sales calls. Make sure you have really solid, not just a blog post that you're keyword jamming and hoping that shows up in a search result, but the one that it's a sales enablement tool first. And then maybe over time, prospects on it before you distribute it. So that's the first thing. I love to put this through the lens of, like, if the founder has a team managing this, what are some questions they could ask? If you're just turning over rocks in the operation, like, hey, how are we paying attention to traffic or conversions?
Yeah. What's the North Star in marketing, right? That's one top level question. If you get 5 different answers, you don't have a North Star.
Solid.
It should always be, pipeline growth, whether that's trials or it's demos, is a good starting point. Then people will come in and say, well, what about opportunities and whatnot? Like, those are just abstractions of demos at the end of the day. But the bottom line, if you get more demos and more trials, you're going to be, growing the company.
Yeah.
The second one is, do you have the content on the site that seems to come up later on in the conversation anyways? I'll give you a good example. Sometimes it's rare. On the trial-led side, you might have good nurture emails about use cases of before and after so that people actually become product qualified leads. Turn anything that's a private sales enablement piece of content, whether that's sitting in an email, which is a broadcast email, or in a PDF, into one-to-many public content. It requires the smallest amount of tweaking, and now it becomes something that will rank in SEO for long-tail terms. It becomes a good remarketing place to send traffic to. It works incredibly well.
I love that. That just, like, demolishes the barrier of entry for that, right? Just take things you already have and just lift the curtain and put it out.
Exactly.
That's great.
Yeah. And by the way, this is how you can discern a good versus a great marketing leader, because sometimes good leaders will come in and be like, the site's shit, let's redesign the site, or the agency shit, let's fire this agency, hire the next, or I have my own people, and we see this all the time.
Yeah.
But it's these not sexy, kind of boring, but very pragmatic things that end up creating growth at the end of the day. So that's one. The second one would be know who it's for page. And so everybody has usually some version of a features page or how it works page, but they don't have a who it's for page, which primarily the first thing that people do when they land on a website, they're going, is this for me, right? Why am I here? Because I've got like 20 different tabs open. What did I click to get to this unfamiliar looking site?
Yeah.
what is this thing? Am I clear on what problem it solves? How is it? How does it work? And what should I do next? If you can't answer those 4 questions in the first 5 seconds, which are all subliminal, no one's like talking it out aloud, but it's happening in their head, just by simply saying who it's for, and we have 3 personas in our kind of methodology: check signers, founders, C-level, CFOs, CISOs, whatever, managers, right? Who manage people, and daily users, who are the individual contributors, right? They all buy different things. The check signer is buying money made, money saved, productivity gained. The manager is basically buying some report to figure out, is there consistency happening here? And the daily user is buying, does this just make my job easier?
Yeah.
Does it help me save time?
Yeah.
And if you don't have those pages kind of set up, then you're leaving people guessing as to how you might help them.
Man, that is so good.
I feel like it's a great place to leave it, because we're leaving the people listening with a hit list of like, they can leave this episode with some homework that they can turn around in a couple days that would probably have a material impact on their demand generation if they do nothing else. That's cool.
If you want to know what great looks like, you should probably go check out the Powered by Search website and the blog. My guess is you've got some great examples of the things you just shared.
You got
on
playbooks
that
exactly
blog.
at the stuff.
Yeah, that's
That's
awesome, man. So poweredbysearch.com, obviously, for the company. Where else can people find you? What else do you have coming out, man?
I'm spending a lot of time on LinkedIn now.
Yeah.
I'm finding that that's where our audience basically is, and creating content basically over there. And then predictablegrowth.com is a book that we are writing. If you go in, there's a first chapter over there that you can opt into.
Cool.
It is a work of love, as I'm sure you guys are aware of as well. Writing a book is no joke.
Yeah.
And so those are some of the places that people can find us.
Amazing. If you are in marketing, curious about marketing, want to learn more about marketing, this is the guy to follow. So everything he just said, you should go sign up for it. That's what I have. Dev, man, thank you so much for hanging with us.
Dude.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, it was a blast.
Awesome.
Super cool.